everybody, if you can hear me. I am joining you from Portland, Oregon. It's not where I'm supposed to be right now. I'm supposed to either be at UT Austin or in Exeter, but so it goes. This is my first time using Facebook Live, so forgive me if I'm not super on top of it. If anyone can hear me, I'm just asking in the chat box to make sure. So before we get started reading, if anyone can hear me, can you just let me know in the chat box? So, okay, awesome. Thanks, Sarah. It's my first time using this, but pretty simple so far. I am also joined here by my cat, who may or may not make an appearance. So it's very nice to be able to do this wearing actual pajamas instead of, you know, making up the top half of myself to look decent and presentable. So I was told, and obviously I've experienced this a lot in the various readings I've done over the years and decades, to maybe briefly discuss my process. And unfortunately, and I've shared this before, I have zero process. So I write when I feel like I need to, particularly when it comes to poetry, and sometimes it comes in gushes and sometimes it's dry for quite a while. The good news for me personally is that when I'm not really writing poetry, that means I don't have anything initially that I'm really needing to process and get out. Obviously, the bad news is that means I'm not really writing. So, oh, thank you, Stella. This is actually my husband's pajamas because I sleep in gym clothes and t-shirts, but it is comfortable. So I have a few poems to share with y'all today. I thought this is pretty rare for me to do, that I would actually read from a couple of my books, just to kind of give a different experience. I normally just read from, you know, text printouts. But the first one I'll share with you is called Great Grace and Sharp Wings, and it was actually just featured, or will be featured this month, I'm not sure, in Portland Monthly. I'm an Oregon native and I live in Portland right now. And so this is in the book Bad Indian by Brick Mantle Books. It was released in April. 37 years old and still starving myself. How much longer until I don't care anymore? You say stop caring now, but I don't know if I can be one of those old ladies with limp hair and no lipstick. Not that this is old, it's just, when does old happen? How do we simply slip into it like it fits? I'm not sure I have the capacity to grow old with grace or by any other means. Do we call fat 60-year-old women fat, or is that when plump begins? How about 70, 80? When does it all end, and how do I stop running hands over stomach to see if today's a skinny day? My plan is to die at 66. Right before the life insurance expires, and maybe, if I do it right, they'll say it was a slender old woman who fell with great grace and sharp wings in front of that rumbling train. There'll be no open casket, and guilt-laden memories are kind to the dead. Please, if you remember, call me beautiful in the obits and choose a photo where my collarbones protrude like plumage. almost made it to the end without a stumble there on the word. I should kind of say with this, because I've had concerned emails from people, I wrote that in the thick of doing my doctoral research on the intersection of eating disorders and poetry. And I think I was right in the middle of Anne Sexton and Sylvia Plath when I was doing that. So while it's a given that obviously not all poets are completely autobiographical or at all, and all of the intricacies that go with that, that was largely inspired by my research. And there's a few Plath poems that are out there floating about at the moment. So the other one I will share with you, from the books at least, is from the book Savagery, which has a gorgeous cover. It was by Airlie Press, which is a nonprofit poetry press here in Oregon. And it's a collective model. So basically, if your manuscript is accepted, you spend the next 3 years working as publisher/editor. I'm actually in my final year, so my last Airlie meeting will be in December. And let's see, so I'll actually share kind of an old one. I'm trying not to make them just all completely depressing. So this is called What They Call Us Indians, and it was about my father. You had a red delicious sticker plastered to your foreman badge. At 7, I didn't know apple was a bad word, the same as Oreo or Twinkie. When I asked what it meant, you just flashed those dazzling white teeth and reclaimed it, owned it. What was so wrong about being natural, delectable, healthy, something that could produce such strong, thick ivories? But not you, my father said. You look just like your mother. And God, she was beautiful in her youth, all long, thick hair, flying behind the motorcycle like a wedding dress train, starved down waist ant-like from meals of mustard and lettuce leaves. But as a child, how I wanted that delicious coloring, craved that toasted skin, soaked chestnut into my pallidness, roasting day after day in my mother's tanning bed. Letting the cancer sink in slowly, a dirty marinade that made me look like you. The ugliness didn't show until decades later, and by then you were gone. Smoke, fragments of bone burned to ashes, a lifeless gray shade, boring, nothing like you, and without scarlet, not a trace. My father passed maybe 15 years ago, and actually didn't produce that many poems, I think because I wasn't really writing in earnest at that time. When my mother passed 3 years ago, that pretty much created an entirely new manuscript. So Savagery kind of became that in many ways. So I consider it a bit of a familial book. I'm switching now to my usual working in Word to pull up some poems to share with y'all. Apparently it's a parent-esque type of day. This is Namesakes, and it appeared also in Savagery. My mother named me after her father she hated, like buying Papa's notice with a fat grandchild would make up for anything. My mother named me after famous cowboys and then went and married an Indian herself. Meanwhile, her own mother said, no darker. My mom named me the second most popular girl's name in 1981 because firsts were for good girls without panic. My middle name was the same as a boy in 6th grade with greasy nails and dirty hair, so I said it was short for Colette. My mother was a surprise 15 years too late. In the hospital, her father said, she ain't much to look at, is she? And asked the nurse to name her. She chose Rita after her own child, and nobody, not nowhere ever, could say a pearl was an ugly thing. My mother named me for a man she despised, well after his girth had gone to skeleton and the coffin flies went still, but still, I thought a namesake should mean something, good and holy, like clean slates, buried shames, and starting overs. I'll also share with you, so this is called A Priest and an Indian Walked into a Bar, and I wrote it in the summer of 2017. I was the artist in residence at the Hosking Houses Trust on the outskirts of Stratford-upon-Avon in England. And one of the people involved in bringing artists into the residency was, forgive me, I'm terrible at religion, but he was basically kind of like the village priest. And he also hosted a poetry mass every December, which is exactly what it sounds like, poetry instead of any other kind of text being shared. He invited me to dinner one night at his apartment, and afterwards, he asked what I was up to, and I said that I was going to be going to the only club in the entire village just to see what it was about, and asked if he wanted to come, and he did. So this is about that night. The priest cooked me risotto while I tongued olives in dry wine. Barefoot and drunk, we compared best sad operas and stumbled through yoga poses in the gloaming. After, giggling like school children through the buzz, sidling up to a bar, bellowing for bourbon and crushed ice. Fill it all the way up. We danced to ABBA and my skirt fell down, but I never once thought to confess more than was settled or ask anything close to forgiveness. So part of my residency there, I was being commissioned to write a poem, not necessarily about my experience, but just that was inspired by my months there. And I sent that to him, and he said, I knew you would talk about that night. But he made me write something else, which ended up being about seeing a play at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre, which featured at the time, at least in that company, the first actor to ever play Cleopatra, and she was a Black woman. So that poem was the first Black Cleopatra. And apparently nobody else in that area seemed surprised about that fact. But that experience, I do highly recommend if you are a female identified writer to check out the Hosking Houses Trust Residency. The next poem I'll share is called All the Ways. Know that just because we're quiet doesn't mean we aren't railing inside. We ate herring in red coats, and I told you all the ways I'd kill myself, how your lips were wilder than the moon. It's a lie that we're born alone, die alone. We arrive through slick thighs, wet bellies, and maybe we'll never see our mothers again. Maybe she'll stick to us like burned batter all our lonely lives. And we'll die with all those lovers, gone mothers, animals that licked our hurts, knotted like stowaways in the most secret, desolate chambers of our hearts. They usher us, shaking, straight into the luminous. I normally kind of ask audiences and fellow poets to participate in some of these poems, but I don't know how well this will work in this format. So I'm going to share a poem with you called Dominican Man, and maybe just by the title alone, some of you will know who it's about. I suspect quite a few will know after I finish, but if you think you know who it's about, please put it in the chat box. You want a Dominican man to not be a Dominican man. Act like the culture's rinsed clean off soon as the white gatekeepers say, he did real good. You stack that Dominican man up real high, tangled parts and broken bits, an effigy thirsty to burn. Take that DR and saw the big R in half so it don't roll no more. Trills are too hard for some folks, but everyone respects a doctor. You say, Dominican man, tell us how, but how do you write and publish and sell misogyny and machismo, forced kisses and grabbing asses if you don't live and breathe and be it too? Dominican man, he opened doors wide like young thighs, and everyone loves a gentleman. So, because I know there is also a delay, that was written about Junot Diaz when all of the scandal was initially happening. it took some internal debate on my part to continue to keep the first editions that I have of his books on my bookshelf, especially my prominent bookshelf, but they are persisting, at least for the moment. So the last one that I will share with you, I think, unless there are slow questions coming in, is also about my time in Stratford. And it's called A Consenting Platypus, about the main host that brought me there. The septuagenarian served me tea in the garden of her thatched roof British cottage. Between spoons of fish pie and too much Prosecco, I told her about the best-selling erotica I ghostwrite, how people don't like sex until at least chapter 19. She asked me about bestiality, which of us animals are the nastiest. No, incest and animals are my hard lines. That's too bad, she demurred. It's incredible what one can do with a consenting platypus. So I was told that that was a truly autobiographical poem, and I was told that the Consenting Platypus was about a book that she offered to lend me, and I politely declined. So just in keeping with the time, we're halfway through, so I'm happy to open it up to any questions or comments at this point. And if I don't see it, I guess I have to keep scrolling. Reading from Sarah, there's often an assumption that your poems are autobiographical. So discussing the role of fiction and research in your work, I mean, that is a big conversation. I'm actually kind of working with that right now. I'm polishing up the Sexton chapter of my research. And obviously every poet is going to be different, but it's interesting to kind of explore. I have a cat hair like right here that I cannot get. Oh, I just got it. It's interesting to see how Sexton saw her role, especially since she was one of the key, quote unquote, confessional poets. And there are so many instances of her flat out saying, this is true, this isn't true, I made this up, I like to lie, I'm good at lying. The article that she wrote, The Freak Show, really discusses that as well in terms of when she's talking about when it comes to reading her poetry, she feels like she instantly became the entertainer and the freak, and she's there to serve a specific purpose. And then there's also the question of how valid and thorough our personal truths are, especially, when we're looking back sometimes several months or years. It's very difficult for me personally to write any kind of creative work that hasn't affected or resonated with me in some capacity, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it truly got to the core affected me. So, I guess the short answer is, like a lot of writers, I draw off my own realities and experiences and then kind of expand beyond that. When I do kind of veer away from what I see and remember as the truth, it's usually to clarify. I'm not taking extravagant side trips to make things seem more fantastical or to resonate more with a wider audience. In terms of poetry, there are definitely times when certain words work better, and some might say that kind of veers away from truth, but I don't think it's my job or any poet's jobs to strictly be autobiographical, and elements of so-called fiction are going to make their way in there anyway. Another question, do you wait for inspiration or do you write because you have to? Both. It's both. With creative writing, with poetry and with fiction, inspiration comes, and that is the catalyst for my writing because I have to. I have found that personally it takes me time to digest experiences or certain traumas. And that in itself, I think, is asking a lot of poets right now, because obviously we all operate in different time frames. and the era of the kind of digital media we have right now and instant gratification and instant news, especially as a Native American woman with a lot of the indigenous issues happening all over the country, well, North America right now. Sometimes we are asked to respond to something that happened almost in real time. An example being the whole Mount Rushmore debacle that happened on 4th of July. We're sometimes expected to respond immediately, and not just responding in how do we feel about that, how do we see this experience, but it's often kind of an unspoken underlying ask of, can you also speak for all Indigenous people? And with there being over 560 federally recognized tribes, and that's not even talking about the non-federally recognized tribes, or even as a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, speaking for all citizens of the Cherokee Nation obviously isn't possible or the right thing to ask. I think, and maybe this is just how I've seen other poets writing about current events, I don't process as quickly as other people. So it's not uncommon for me to be writing about something a year after it happened, and by then, because of how we're expecting instant responses, it feels outdated. So the whole idea of inspiration and writing because I have to is my reality as a poet, but that doesn't necessarily resonate with audiences and publishers and what people want to see. I'm already kind of a little nervous about, I have a book releasing in 2021 by New Rivers Press. It's called Antipodes, and it's an experimental form of poetry that can be read forward or backward, word by word. I haven't seen that exact format published in a major literary journal, and I keep asking people if that has a name that's well known. I've seen it called mirror poetry, but then mirror poetry has also been attributed to reverse poetry, which is read forward or backward, line by line. But this particular collection addresses what were current events in terms of immigration, which obviously is still happening, but it isn't making headlines like it used to be. And there's already concern over it being dated. So when it comes to publishing books, instead of just publishing in journals, you know, there's obviously a much longer wait time and lag period. And I feel like there's increasing demands on poets and writers in general to be really responsive in real time, which just isn't possible when we're talking about traditional publishing approaches. I also have another book coming out in 2021. It was the Birdie Prize winner from Meadowlark Books. And it has a very uninspired title, but it's Selected Poems 2000 to 2020. And it was edited and curated by Brenna Cotty of Calyx Journal. And there's definitely a part of me that feels like that is a culmination of one of my careers. And I'm not sure if my knowing that that is coming out is playing a role in my lack of creating poetry in recent months, or if it's a whole lot of other things happening as well. But I do think that's also at least somewhat dictating the amount of output that I have happening right now with my poetry. I have one kind of draft. It's part of a draft that's just been sitting on this laptop for about 6 weeks, and that's not very common for me. Usually I write quickly and it comes out in a gush, and I know immediately if I consider it a quality or worthwhile poem. This is actually the first poem that I started and then kind of set aside and keep thinking about possibly going back to, but I haven't, found that inspiration yet. So yeah, those are a couple projects. Oh, my name is Jessica Mehta. So I'm responding to a comment. Yeah, so those two books are a couple projects that I have going on right now. I'm also gearing up for, it will be my first virtual residency at the Crazy Horse Memorial in South Dakota. So all of August, I will be giving talks and lectures and workshops on Wednesdays that are completely free, talking about various facets of, well, not just poetry, actually. I'm also kind of integrating my visual art in there as well. So that's going to be a unique experience. It's coming up soon, and a big part of the Crazy Horse residency is kind of touching on a concurrent project that I have going on at the Independent Publishing Resource Center, or IPRC, here in Portland, where I'm learning various traditional publishing techniques like letterpress and risograph, and ultimately working towards creating a single issue journal featuring Native American poets with their poems handwritten as well. So that journal is called Interpunct, INTERPUNKED. The submission process is being hosted by Airly Press. So if you know anybody who is Native and would like to submit, it's free to submit. I'm paying $20 per poet, and then also $10 donation towards a local Native nonprofit here. And as Cheryl's asking, the process of mirror poetry. So I call it I'm gonna type in the thing here. I call it antipodes. There we go. So the process, the process is a nightmare. It makes your brain, it made my brain work in different ways. And it's basically, the easiest way to actually check it out is on my author site, which I'm sure PIP has, but I'm just going to put it in here as well. If you go to my author site, there's an algorithm on there where you can actually try writing antipodes, and it automatically reverses the text. So antipodes is more like putting together a puzzle than it is, quote unquote, writing poetry. And I found, because I taught this poem in various workshops for people who don't consider themselves poets, I feel like it removes some of the perceived barriers for poets of all stages in their career. You know, we think that writing poetry is elitist or boring or hard, and it is hard, or hard and dry. And this is more like language play and gives us permission to just see what we think works and what doesn't work. I know we're coming up here on this almost being done, but I believe I have an antipode. I do, readily available. So one of the antipodes, because it's so much easier to give an example than to explain it, is called Awakening Bedrooms of Monsters. And ultimately, antipodes create two different poems. So the first version, the first line, is Monsters of Bedrooms Awakening in Stumbles. The last line of the second version is Stumbles in Awakening Bedrooms of Monsters. So reverse poetry, and sometimes what's called mirror poetry, is when a poem can be read top to bottom, line by line. This is the same thing, except it's word by word, which really just makes it even more frustrating to write. But what I loved about it is that I found that it was able to not just sustain the poet's natural writing voice, but also kind of expands it in different ways. So even though I ended up writing 48 of these, and some days I really hated having to get up and do it because I was writing one a day, it never felt contrived. I don't think it reads that way, and I think maybe it allows our subconscious to have a little bit more input than we normally have when we're writing poetry. So if you'd like to check it out, you certainly can on my website, and I'm just making sure I know the right link for that. Yeah, so on my website, very top, it says Antipode, and you can just play with it right in there. There's a link for Equal Reality because somebody at Equal Reality made that algorithm for me. All right, so that is all the time we have, unless there's any final question here that I'm not seeing. The last thing I see in the chat box is just me sharing the author site. If anyone does have any questions or would like to connect with me, you can also, the easiest way to do that is just on my author site, click on contact, and that goes right to my personal email. So thank you everyone for joining me, and stick around for the double feature happening after this. All right, have a good night.